Okay, let's introduce Ray. Ray Major was born in 1949 and was raised in Bath Township in Franklin County, Indiana. His family was in the livestock business where he grew up tending feeder calves and pigs. He has also gardened and grown trees since childhood. Ray earned a BS degree in wildlife biology from Purdue University in 1974. And much of his life's work has been as a tree farmer on his own place in Clark County, Indiana, as well as timber management and hardware plantation management work in cooperation with other tree farmers in Southern Indiana. In retirement, Ray administers a Facebook page, Trees from Seed, which serves as a resource and advice column for growing, protecting, and caring for native woody plants by direct seeding. This includes everything from growing a single tree, a shade tree in the front yard from an acorn to reforesting abandoned crop fields, lawns and idle land by direct seeding. I'll now turn it over to my friend Ray Major. And by the way, if you could mute yourself, please, whoever's talking.
Yes.
All righty, Ray, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, the video, there it has begun. Okay.
All right.
Oh, good. Very good. Oh, I see my neighbor Ann. Only it says Ellen Jacquard under her name. How is are you sharing a screen today, perhaps? No matter. It's a pleasure to be here. What a crowd. I hope I can be helpful to some of you. I have two topics that are seasonal that I would like to address briefly. And the first one is the dispersal of wind-borne tree seed. About half of the native species in genera, the seed ripens on the trees in the winter and is released from the tree on the wind in late winter through mid-spring. There's a lot of important genera that do this. It includes the willows, aspens, cottonwoods, sycamore, all the maples. So a lot of genera, the elms, the ashes, tulip, poplar, in the pine family, spruces and firs and hemlocks and pines, catawba, box elder, a great many genera release their seeds late winter and early spring. And if one knows how to prepare planting sites for them, they're easy to grow on small spaces or for reforesting large areas. If you read the Forest Service tree seed manual or the Forest Service Handbook of Silviculture, which is USDA publication 272, with these genera, you'll see phrases like this over and over again. Sweet gum reproduces best on disturbed soils, or tulip poplar reproduces well on abandoned agricultural row crop fields, or sycamore produces well on bare alluvial moist soils, that is to say, soils that are exposed during floods along streams. And so these trees, many of them, the seed can travel for hundreds of, but not hundreds, many tree heights, or perhaps up to a mile on the wind. When you get strong winds early in the spring, sycamore seeds can blow a long way. They're generally of two types. They're the samaras, that is the helicopters, and you're most familiar with those from seeing the helicopters of the soft maples. And then there are the parachutes. That's things that have a seed arrangement that's much like the cotton of cottonwood or sycamore. And so I would like to entertain questions about those species and discuss how to propagate those since the season is upon us. They're beginning to blow and will be coming down from now until mid-April or so. And the other matter that I'd like to discuss is growing trees on the windowsill in pots. I know I've been a pretty hard guy against that idea. It's inefficient. It's risky. However, many folks have not grown trees at all, or maybe not gardened at all. And if you grow a few trees on the windowsill, it's certainly harmless, and it allows one to get a feel for how to start seedlings. So we can discuss those two topics, but I'm willing to entertain any kinds of questions. So if you will begin fielding questions, Bill. Are they to appear in front of me like this? Shall I read the question? Oh, now it's gone. A question did appear. Here we go. I'll read these then and keep them up there on the screen. The question is from Natalie: is it best to collect? Well, now the question has disappeared, but I think it means, is it best to collect the seeds of these wind-borne trees, or I suppose to allow nature to distribute them? And the answer is, you can do both things. If you prepare a bare seed bed by disturbing the soil, and there's several ways to do this, burning of dry grass, burning of the vegetation, and application of herbicides, of course, kills the weeds and removes them, but generally they also need actual soil disturbance. So if you disturb a soil, if you disc up a field, or even turn a few spades of dirt, if there are seed trees of these species nearby and they have produced a plentiful supply of seed for this year, the seed is likely to blow in on that bare soil. And if you're patient, you're probably going to get seedlings simply by the natural process of the dispersal of the seeds. But you also can gather them when they're ripe and sow them on such areas. And generally speaking, they're very small, many of them, and light, and they hardly need incorporating into the soil. At the most, you can rake them in lightly or press them in with a rake. But generally, if they fall on disturbed or bare soil or cultivated soil, they'll germinate. I hope that answers that question. Another?
Yeah. Hey, Ray. This is Bill again. Let's see, we've got a few questions here. We've got someone who's actually Susie Plunkett is asking about hemlock cones in her yard, but hardly ever see any starts of it. Probably not native, but I don't know. I know we have a native hemlock, so
yeah.
Where do we go there?
Well, Eastern hemlock is native to areas along Raccoon Creek and Sugar Creek in western Indiana. And I think there may be some native hemlock in the northern tier of counties, or at least in part of them.
Brown County, yeah.
Yeah, there are other small outliers. Hemlock is not widespread, and it's restricted to generally cooler north slopes along streams, or in the case of the northern counties, I think that might be the southern extent of its larger northern range. All of the trees in the pine family produce cones, and when the cone is open, the seed is already dispersed. If you have cones that are on, I'm sorry, I'm jiggling the screen around, I'll be still. If the cones are opened on the tree, generally the seeds have been dispersed. So what one needs to find is ripe cones that have not opened or just beginning to open. You dry the cones, and when the cones dry and the scales open, if there are viable seeds within that cone, they'll fall out. I don't think hemlock actually reproduces very well or vigorously in at least the outlier parts of Indiana along the streams in the west and the few places in Brown County and Hemlock Cliffs and so forth. That's much the same with white pine. White pine produces cones here, but when you get much farther south than, say, here in Monroe County, you very seldom see white pine seedlings. They produce far better in the north, in the main part of their natural range. Go ahead. Another question?
Yeah, Ray. Thanks, Susie, for the question. Let me see here.
Nancy Jones has an important one. If I may, I see it on the screen. Yeah, the ashes produce a samara. It's a wind-borne seed. Their imperiled status from the emerald ash borer doesn't change that. The big ashes are dying, but I am most familiar with white ash in the extreme southern counties. And along Interstate 64, white ash continues to reproduce in huge numbers. In fact, it's perhaps on some soil principal pioneer tree. They get up to a size of 4, 5, 6 inches in diameter, large enough to produce large amounts of seed, and ash appears to be maintaining itself as a small, very short-lived tree, at least in some areas. So yeah, ash is a wind-borne samara, and they respond in the same way. They'll come up through goldenrod and they'll come up through fescue, but if you prepare a bare or disturbed soil and ash seeds blow on that, you'll get a lot of ash seedlings.
Great, thank you. Natalie Haley is asking, is it best to collect maple seeds, sycamore, etc., and just overseed them in a site for restoration with exposed soil? Can we also cover how to grow these trees from seed?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. Of course, if you prepare a site, and there are other risks, of course, when you cultivate or disturb the soil. This only prepares a seed bed that is more amenable to these native trees, but it doesn't preclude the seeding in of invasive plants as well. My observation about Callery pear is Callery pear seems to seed itself in through sod better than any of the native trees, with perhaps the exception of ash and red cedar. So if you disturb the soil, you're opening it up to other things that may not be so good. But if you disturb the soil to grow these wind-borne natives, they will respond. You'll get a bigger proportion of them in most cases. So it doesn't mean you won't have any weeding to do down the road. In terms of propagating them, you want to imitate nature. Take the seeds. If you are going to grow them in pots, that's fine. Or if you're going to grow them in garden beds and nursery beds for transplant, that's fine. In general, many of them have relatively low germination rates, but produce immense quantities. So you want to be very generous in seeding. Don't be afraid to put 20 sycamore seeds in the pot, and if you get 2 or 3 seedlings, that's not a failure, because your goal is to put 1 seedling in that pot. And if you get more than 1, as they develop, pick out the healthy ones and pull the others out and throw them away. Give that seedling that you intended to grow plenty of space. If you want to grow, and this is the same when you're sowing them outdoors, be very generous, attempt to produce a lot of seedlings because your goal is to produce at least one in the planting site and hoe the rest of them out. If you wanted to plant more planting sites or indeed a whole field, prepare those sites in advance and sow seed on each of them. This is much easier. I realize how difficult it is for people to treat little tiny orphan tree seedlings as weeds, but in fact, the process of thinning plantings is no different than the process of thinning carrots in the vegetable garden. If you want good carrots, you have to thin them out because you can only grow so many carrots in a given space. I hope that's helpful. Most of these, by the time they are released in the spring, they don't have a stratification requirement generally. By the time they're released from the tree, most of these things are ready to germinate and grow.
Great, Dave. Dave is asking, would it be beneficial to cover dispersed seed with straw, such as we do with grass?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe the willows and the cottonwoods are really exceptional. They require to be right on the surface. They require light, and other species may require light to a degree. Willows are generally regarded as the most shade intolerant species, and they generally, as we all know, only come up on alluvial or disturbed, very wet soils. They're restricted to wet soils, but they also don't tolerate competition, and they don't tolerate much shade. And the seed, and there may be botanists here who can help me with this, and anyone can chime in. Willows and cottonwood and aspen generally should not be incorporated into the soil or covered very deeply. The seed requires the presence of light to germinate. That may be true to a lesser degree of some of the others. But for the maples and the ashes and elms, straw can be very helpful or in protecting that seed and providing some shade and some moisture. Go ahead.
Okay. Aneldia says, I have chestnut trees, 40 years old. This year, we have saved some of the nuts in the refrigerator. Are they good for growing? I have plenty to share if people are willing to pay postage.
Okay, good. Oh, yeah. Likely these are Chinese chestnuts. I'm a chestnut eater, and I have been for most of my adult life, and so I got to confess that I have eaten Chinese chestnuts, and I eat a lot of them. Under the current circumstances, with the possible revival of the American chestnut in several different forms as hybrids and otherwise, and we needn't discuss the philosophical aspects of that, it may or may not be good to continue growing Chinese chestnuts, but they're well established as an orchard tree in many parts of the country. And I know that deer hunters are very fond of planting Chinese chestnuts. They plant a lot of them. So the Chinese chestnut and its hybrids with the American chestnut and with the Japanese chestnut are here. The question is, can you grow the stored ones? If they've been stored cold but dry in the refrigerator, they may or may not be viable. The thing to do would be immediately soak them in water for 2 or 3 days and then put them in a bag with wet sand or wet peat moss in the ones that you hope to grow, and store them, say, till April in refrigeration. This can also be done outdoors underground in rodent-proof containers if you want to. Chestnut tends to mold more readily, become moldy more readily than the oaks. So they should be kept a little drier, and probably peat may be better than sand, but don't store them in any kind of heavy soils. And they can be planted in the spring. If you stratify them now, after soaking a few days, if they're viable, then by the 1st of April, they should begin to show some roots if they're viable. Most people who are growing chestnuts and acorns have had them in stratification, say, since December, and stored in that way, stratified in that way. Most of the species of oaks and the chestnuts and even the hickory nuts are beginning to show roots by now. End of February, the red oak acorns and many of the other nut trees begin to germinate and show roots, even in cold storage. Root growth begins earlier. So when you see root growth, it's time to plant them. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, Nancy is asking, are trees part of this group? I guess the original discussion you had, since they produce winged seeds, should we still plant the species even though mature individuals mostly die from the ash borer beetle? Should we still plant to keep the species seed production going?
Oh, the ash.
Yes.
You certainly may. If you have, I would say this, if you're reforesting areas and you have parent trees, seed producing trees nearby, and ash seeds in on your prepared site, perhaps along with tulip poplar and sweet gum or whatever, those that are available that can blow in on the wind. I wouldn't preclude ash. I would let it grow. It's going to grow, and it may reach a size where it produces seeds and continues to reproduce. I wouldn't put any money into it. I wouldn't go to the nursery and buy ashes and plant them. But if you want to grow them, and this applies on a small scale too, if you want to grow them by sowing the seed directly yourself, on a small scale, by all means do so. But know that the ash trees that you produce might live 10 or 15 years, produce a few crops of seed, and then the borer is likely to find them, and they're not going to live very long. But I think they're worth growing as part of the pioneer forest, if you will, part of the old field forest type. Old field generally refers to the trees that readily seed in on abandoned row crop fields. So please grow them. They can't hurt anything.
By the way, if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and you know, at a break between questions, you can, especially after the question, ask your follow-up question, or feel free to make comments as well.
I might add one thing about ash, and that is to say, ash is in on old fields. Is browsed fairly heavily by deer, but it's such a prolific sprouter that it's one of the pioneer trees that shows up first in abandoned places. When I say abandoned, I'm not talking about ownership of the property, but uncultivated places. It's one that shows up early. The deer gnaw it back, but it just keeps sprouting. And unlike the problem with oaks, the ash, it's hard for the deer to browse them so hard that it kills the ash tree. So you got some trees there to start with. Ash does serve that function. I'm sorry, now the next question, Bill.
Yeah, so the next question is from David. Ray, what is your, again, another ash question for blue ash? I have one tree and would like to plant more. So
are you in Cincinnati? Or you're on limestone somewhere?
Yeah, Ray, you're up around Indianapolis. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Blue ash grows.
David.
But
Yes, correct. I'm
go ahead.
Have one blue ash tree.
Yes, sir.
And was just curious. I hear that it's more resistant to emerald ash borer than the others.
I think Ellen Jacquard is here somewhere. And Ellen, do you know? I believe that blue ash has some more resistance. Do you know more about that than I do? I'm not familiar with it because I've never lived in an area where it's a common tree. I don't know.
I'm here, Ray. I'm using the MC Iris site, so it's up with her name.
Now I understand how it happened. Okay. If anyone else here knows about borer resistance in the blue ash, please chime in. I've heard that is so. So again, they're certainly worth. If does it produce seed?
It does.
Well, then I would think that it would be perfectly fine to propagate it if you have space to do it. I doubt that blue ash is going to replace the white ash or even the green ash as a large shade tree or as a timber producing tree to make baseball bats, but I might be wrong. How big is the tree?
It is probably 10 inches in diameter. And then down on some property, family farm in Kentucky, northern Kentucky, on the limestone that you mentioned, not far from Cincinnati.
Right, there's a lot of limestone. Oh, I mean, yeah, in the bluegrass and in the limestone and up in the Whitewater Valley where there's a lot of flat rock, and so and on the Flat Rock River, and then over here in Monroe County there's limestone. But I bet there's not much blue ash in Brown County where it's sandstone.
Interesting, yeah. And we, on the farm, we have a lot of dead white ashes, but the blue ash are just monstrous. They're like 24-inch or larger.
Oh, down, yeah. So I know I've been through over in the bluegrass, and I don't know if you're down in that far around Lexington and so forth, but blue ash and bur oaks are some of the common big pasture trees in the horse farms, I believe, down there. So yeah, I would think grow it if you can germinate it and grow it. It should grow much the same way that the other ashes do.
In Southeast Michigan, it does seem to be thriving, even while the other species are gone.
Yeah, I understand it up in there. The black ash swamps just died out quick in southern Michigan. Yes. So yeah, grow blue ash.
Yes.
Yeah. So for the rest of you folks here, if you're on if your soils are on a limestone bedrock, blue ash is not a common tree, but it may indeed serve some of the purposes, especially if we find it to be resistant in the long run. Go ahead, Bill.
All right, let's see here. Did somebody else want to comment? All right, I'll keep going then. Let's see, Linda. I have a few butternut seeds, not wind-borne. I potted them last fall and left them outside over winter. Do I need to break them out of their shells?
Oh, no. All the nuts will germinate in due time. I hope they're still in the pots. I don't know if you have squirrels or not. That's a primo nut, but maybe you have them under screens or in a cage or something. I hope they're there. Walnuts, butternut is a walnut. They tend to germinate late. And it looks like you might have to crack the thing open, but no, they are in a cage. I see Linda says. Linda Thompson has them in a cage. They may not break root until the 1st of May, and the seedlings might not show up out of the ground until the middle of May. So what's required is patience. They are a very vigorous thing, and they'll They produce a gigantic taproot, and if you want to grow them in pots, I would suggest the biggest pots, the deepest pots that you can afford, because they even with butternut is even larger as a seedling root than black walnut, but you can dig up a black walnut seedling that's 6 inches tall, and it'll have a root that's 16, 18 inches deep, look like a big carrot you bought at the grocery store. So if you got them in little short pots, they're going to become root bound. It's not good for them. So if you're growing the big nut trees and the oaks in pots, get deep pots, be prepared to transplant the other pots even bigger. And I would suggest that if you insist on growing nut trees in pots, get them in the ground and protect them with fencing as soon as possible. In fact, I know there are probably here folks who grow oaks in pots. And there are pots and there are pots. There are growing containers that are far better than common plastic pots. They cost money, but those kinds of grow pots in growing containers can be found, and they do produce better quality nursery stock. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see here. Nancy, how can we best start replacing the mature oaks in Bloomington's residential neighborhoods? Many look like they will soon be in decline. This is a shade-intolerant species, I believe. Should we be planting from seedlings or seeds in yards with limited sunlight?
Oh, well, depending on what forester you ask, or botanist, Indiana has 18 or 19 species of native oaks, and their shade tolerance varies a good deal. White oak and its white oak subgenus relatives generally have greater shade tolerance than the red oaks, and the shade tolerance varies within those groups. Shingle oak and pin oak are regarded as the least tolerant of shade. And so, of course, pin oak is the most commonly planted oak. It's also, as oaks go, relatively short-lived. So many of the big pin oaks are, in fact, reaching their maturity. 120, 130 years is a pretty old pin oak. A white oak may live much longer than that, of course, 200 years or more, and far more in rare cases. So, yeah, it'd be good to plant lots more oaks where there's space to plant them, and protect them with cages. There's an old saying that goes, don't put a Dollar Tree in a 10-cent hole. And there's a new saying that I like that says, because of browsing pressure that we all have to deal with, don't put a Dollar Tree in a 10-cent cage. Get a good viable handful of acorns, plant them, and put a stout cage around them. Put the money in the cage. Don't put the money in the seedling. Protect that seedling. Grow lots of small seedlings, or grow lots of trees from seed, and cage them properly. That would be my solution, because it's an affordable solution. Large nursery stock is expensive, and then in addition, you have the cost of building a strong enough cage to keep the deer out, which means each tree is going to wind up costing several $100s, whereas year-old bare root nursery stock or trees grown from seed are far less expensive, so you can afford to put a lot more money and effort into protecting them. Go ahead. There's a lot of about that too, of course.
Great. Okay, from Mary, how do I best plant pawpaw seeds?
Oh, pawpaw. Pawpaw is perhaps I think pawpaw is, at least on moist, cool bottomland soils, well-drained ones, pawpaw is the most shade tolerant of the native trees on those kinds of sites. It's not the most shade tolerant on drier soils because it doesn't do well on drier soils. So propagating pawpaw seeds means that those seeds should be kept moist and cool and shaded from the time they come out of the fruit, and they should be grown in shady conditions. I'm not sure about trying to grow them indoors. I suspect that they require much higher humidity than you can provide on the windowsill. They might work in a shaded greenhouse. They germinate they should be stratified from the time you gather them, cold, damp stratification, either in refrigeration or outdoors in rodent-proof containers under the soil with good drainage, not wet. And then they can be planted in the field or in the nursery in mid-spring. If those that have been stratified now probably still don't show roots. They're very slow, and they probably aren't going to show any roots till the middle of April. So you have to plant them in the beds or in the field, and then you have to be patient. I field sowed a lot of pawpaws simply by going to young woods along small streams where the woods has developed enough that it has shade, but it doesn't have pawpaw trees yet, and just sown them, just throw the rotten fruit on the ground. The raccoons and possums and foxes will distribute that seed, and you have to do it with a great deal of faith because you don't see any seedlings the first summer, and you start to see them in the second summer, but in subsequent years, they'll begin to show up. It doesn't grow fast, especially in the shade of the woods. So cool, moist conditions, shaded conditions, out of the wind, a high humidity, and patience are required.
Okay, from Edward, Ray, he's a long time, he says, Ray, long-time listener, first-time caller. I have been following trees from seed for quite some time now from here in Maryland. I am interested in succession underneath some older white pines. Might you have an idea for species of interest?
Okay, Edward, yeah, well, good. You may, where you are in Maryland, white pine is probably a native tree. It's only native to, in a limited sense, in Indiana. Again, much like the hemlock in some of the western counties along streams and in the northern interior counties in Indiana. But I assume that in the hilly parts of Maryland, at least white pine is a common native tree. You probably have the same browsing challenges from deer that we have. The oaks, white oak especially, and the hickories, beech and sugar maple generally supplant supplant white pines rather. I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Over time, but that is a long period of time. So if you have a dense stand of white pines, if they're not very old, one way to promote the growth of the hardwood trees might be to thin that stand, to put a little more light in it, to allow sufficient light for the hardwood trees to germinate and grow a little faster. If you face a lot of deer pressure, you might try getting some 2x4 welded wire and just setting up cheap little exclosures with a few posts, maybe up to about 10 feet in diameter, the deer won't jump into a circular enclosure that size or smaller and wait and watch. And those native trees should seed in there. And if they do show up and there's in an exclosure and the deer can't get in there, you will begin to see what native hardwood trees might grow under your white pines. And then if that's the case, and you got a lot of deer pressure, there are other solutions, but one of the solutions would be to build temporary exclosures to allow those seedlings protection to start either naturally or by seeding them in artificially. I hope that was helpful.
All right, we'll go on. Natalie, we are planting 7,100 native trees this year in the park. I work for, using volunteers and limited staff, sandy soils, old riverbeds, and wind-blown sand dunes. Some areas are wet, floodplains, and some are dry dune soils. Do you have a favorite tree planting shovel? We are also going to seed in Virginia rye, in wetter, I think, soil around these plantings, and little blue stem and such, and drier soil around these plantings. With that many trees, I don't think we can afford a deer guard, so we may be using natural tree debris. What are your thoughts on any of the above?
Okay. Are you up in the region, in the sand, in the dunes? You can chime in if you wish.
I'm in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Oh,
so,
Fort Wayne. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is sand along riverine sand along rivers, along the banks, or I don't know much about sand up in your area, but you can use dead hedges for protection of seedlings if you have the material and if you have the resources and wherewithal to maintain them. You can build hedging out of dead wood. I recently posted a video about that topic on trees from seed. The English know way more about using sticks than we do. And there's a picture there's a video of a fellow building a dead hedge in his garden, which is simply an enclosure, a fence made of sticks. You can read up on how to do that. It's a lot of labor. And since many of the trees you might plant might take several years to get big enough that the deer can't bother them, it may require some long-term maintenance, but it can be done. I have hedged seedlings just with rough brush piles. If we work in oak plantations where we're doing a lot of pruning and thinning, so there's a lot of material on the ground. And many times we found a desirable oak or walnut sapling and just pile brush around it. And the brush pile doesn't have to be very tall. If the brush pile is wide enough that it tangles the deer's feet, it discourages him and he won't go in there. You didn't want to get shot at or ambushed while he's tangled in a brush pile simply to eat a few oak leaves. So yeah, that can be done. The other parts of the question had to do with what to plant where. You often see the term right tree in the right place. The forester wants to put the right tree on the right site. That is, a given species of tree will do best on a given soil type with with a given slope and aspect. Aspect means the cardinal direction that a hillside, a slope might face, and slope means how steep the hill is. So trees planted on sandy soils, trees that do well on sandy soils might not do well on clay soils. Again, the USDA Forest Service Handbook of Silviculture, publication 272, is chock full of information on the silvics of the individual species. And you can read articles, and it's online. You can read articles about a given species there and get good information on what soil types are suitable for a given species. That may be helpful to do. You also should be able to get plenty of information about that from your district forester or from Purdue. Purdue Forestry has a lot of publications on those very topics. I must add here that I encourage everyone to ask me questions, but also to Google questions about growing trees. I've never Googled the question of how to grow a given species without finding tons of material on how to do so in videos and written material, and a lot of it's really good if you're, and most of it's aimed at growing them in pots or nursery beds. But if you learn a few basic principles of how to grow them in the field, you can always transfer the ideas in such videos to field sowing as well. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see here. I think those are some follow-ups, discussion. You all are great. This is from River. Thank you. I'm looking very forward to meeting you, Ray. I understand we will be co-presenting at Terry Cook's Grand Covening Festival.
Yes, let's see if there's the Toad Fest. Yeah, I'm aware of each other. I think we've corresponded a little bit, River. I'm looking. You live here in Bloomington? Would you tune in here and tell us a little bit? I'm told that you're a guy I need to meet.
Yeah,
there he is.
Here I am.
There you are. Hello. Yeah.
And here you are.
Yes,
That's
sir.
River, we will be. Oh,
what was your question? I didn't get to that.
Well, I just wanted to know how to get in touch with you, and if we can get together, and I could tell you more about what I'm up to.
Well, sure, of course.
My presentation.
Hey, you know what? Bill asked me about putting my telephone number on the presentation. And, you know, I've never gotten a single telephone call about trees from anybody. They write me and they comment. So, ladies and gentlemen, 812-367-0847. There you are. If you wanted my phone number,
812-367-0847.
So if you wanted to ask for my phone number, I'm sorry,
367-0847.
There it is. It's been typed up. I doubt that it'll change. I doubt that I'll get a lot of telephone calls. But how did you put the email, my own email, on this presentation somewhere, Bill?
I do have it. It will be in the Trello in the next few days. And Bill, if you want to go ahead and post all the links again, that would be great.
Yeah, I can always go ahead.
And yeah, so anyway, but all his contact information will be there.
And Facebook tells me that I respond to questions on Trees from Seed. It says something about my response rate is excellent or some such thing. So if you want to talk, write me, you know.
That might be a good way to get in touch too.
That's right. Good, good. I'm looking forward to meeting you, River.
And likewise, sir.
You bet.
Okay, let's see. I've got time. We've got time maybe just for another. Looks like we might just have one more question.
Oh, man.
Let's do this. Any tips on, this is from Diane, any tips on starting catalpa trees? Yeah. I've kept one pod in my refrigerator since end of last October.
Okay, catalpa also really has no great need to be stratified. When did you say late last summer?
No,
it says October.
October. Was the pot brown and ripe?
It was brown.
Was it matured? Yes. Okay. And then it's probably okay. There was no real need to even refrigerate it. I recently reposted an old video on the germination of catalpa, and all I did was gather the seed, shuck the seeds out of the pod. It's a little double samara, structurally much like the samaras of sugar maple, only they're linear. The two seeds face each other, if you will, and wrapped them in wet paper and put them on the shelf, and they started showing roots within a week. So it would be good to take some of the seed. If you open that pod out, it'll shake several little white double samaras, little seeds with a wing. There's a little flat seed on one end and a kind of a raggedy looking wing that you'll recognize as such. And you wrap a few of those seeds in wet paper and put them on a warm shelf, keep them moist, look at them every few days. And if they begin to produce roots, then you've got viable seed. And you may want to pot those seeds up, or you just may want to hang on to the rest of the seeds until spring and plant them outdoors. They're easy to grow. Catalpa is a weed, and I must say that there's opinion about the nativity, the nativeness of catalpa, and the appropriateness of it. It's well established, and I suppose there were worse things you could grow. And I, being an old farm kid who cut catalpa for fence posts, from my viewpoint, catalpa has long been established as part of agriculture here. It's like the same problem with black locusts. They make great fence posts, poles, and so forth, and fish and bait too, for that matter. But anyway, that's how to grow catalpa. Okay, and then now, so now right away, there's opinions from folks who would never plant catalpa, and they have a legit claim there. Catalpa is here, it's well established. Whether we should regard it as a hideous, invasive, we need to have a philosophical discussion of that somewhere else later on. But that's how it grows. Go ahead.
Okay, looks like we're going to be wrapping up here. If you can you say the name of the silviculture publication again?
Yes.
And then some final thoughts, Ray.
Yeah,
and then I'll close it.
There are two Forest Service publications that are invaluable. The first one is the USDA Forest Service Handbook handbook number 272, and it's entitled The Silvics of Forest Trees of the United States. And silvics means their habits, how they grow, what kind of soils they grow on, how they germinate, how they reproduce, and how it's sort of an ecology. And it doesn't include every species, but it includes most of the timber species. And the other book, which is much more extensive, is the Forest Service Handbook of the Forest Service Seed Manual of Woody Trees. That's of woody plants. The Woody Plant Seed Manual. If you Google the Forest Service Woody Plant Seed Manual, it will show up. On paper, it's a stack of books about 5 feet high, but it's online, it's searchable by species, and nursery people use it. It has all the studies that have ever been done on the collection and stratification and storage and germination of native, in fact, all trees that are present, it doesn't distinguish between native and non-native. All the trees that are found on the continent in the US and mostly Canada and northern Mexico. Oh, someone has put a link for it up there. I just saw. Good.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right, Ray, any final thoughts?
Have
you set it up?
Been great. I've said enough. It's been really fun. I hope I've been useful to some folks. And I always remember that I don't know everything either. Don't be afraid to find information other places. I've been planting trees for 60 years, but I don't know everything. I appreciate the questions. They were all good ones, every single one. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ray. As always, I appreciate your knowledge and you're able to express so well yourself and communicate so well, and you're much appreciated. So that's all the time we have today. If you have any other questions, feel free, of course, to go to Ray's Facebook group, Facebook page, although you can't really ask directly there, but you do have his email in the slides that I shared that will be in the Trello board. And we'll be communicating all of this in the very near future. You can always contact seed@indiananativeplants.org. And I don't know that we put that in the link. Bill, if you might be able to do that before we leave, seed@indiananativeplants.org.
Bill, I also will answer questions if people put them in the comment section, even if it's on a post that's on a not different related to that question. Okay. People do message me, but I often then put those responses and make them public because they're of interest to a lot of folks. So I can do it in that way.
Great, excellent. So thanks again, Ray. And I'd like to also thank Bill Lonberg for helping with some of the technical stuff in the background and also being a backup. I've had issues with my sound in the past, but I spent $1,000 on a new computer. So I think it's being consistent now. But anyway, thanks so much, everyone. Happy growing native plants from seed. All the best. Bye-bye.